Welcome everyone to session 3 of the Data Science Summit. This session is integrating data analytics with practice, instructional leadership, and services. And today's presenter is going to be Christine Shipman-Smith, and she's from SDCOE, an executive leadership coach for learning and leadership services. And before she gets started, I do want you to know I'm Carrie Lane. I'm going to be monitoring the chat today, and we'll be taking questions toward the end of the presentation. So any questions that you ask in the chat, I'll be collecting them. And then at the end, we'll go through all of your questions. And also just to note that this session is being recorded. So now I'm going to turn it over to Christine, and she has a great presentation for you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you this morning. Before we get started, I would love to ask you to drop your where you work and what your title is or what you do on a daily basis within your district or organization. It's always helpful to know what my audience is that I'm speaking to. I am very excited to share with you some of the work that I've been engaged in with my team over the course of the last 14 months of the COVID shutdown for so many sites. I appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule, and we're going to be focusing on creating the dream team. The approach to this presentation is I'll be sharing with you for about 30 to 35-ish minutes, and then have time for discussion and dialogue regarding anything that you have surfaced. And so I'd encourage you to take notes that we can revisit, because I really do love that robust conversation at the end. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I love to start off with this. Data is the new bacon. And so if you are in education in any way, shape, or form, you know that data is everywhere and people love it. They love it in any way, shape, or form. And the emphasis over the last several years has been on big data, data visualizations, data analytics, and evidence-based decision-making. The origins of this go back to the NCLB era when data-driven decision-making came about at an even greater scale, but it's been solidified over the last several years, and it's created some obstacles for us as we've moved into a transformative phase of education in the time of the COVID shutdown and recovery response. And so I'm going to share with you a bit of what our team has been doing to try and re-envision the way that we approach data work, in hopes that the model that we are leveraging will provide you some guidance in how you can support with shifting work within your district or organization. And so to start off, we had to identify the organizational challenge that we were working to address at the beginning of the COVID shutdown. And this is very context specific with recovery and responsiveness in mind. And so what I'm going to share with you is this visual that comes out of the book Street Data by Shane Safir and Dr. Jamila Dugan. And it captures the levels of data very appropriately to help us visualize what the shift has been that we've seen occurring since we've been in this really challenging dynamic within education over the last 14 months. And so Shane Safir and Dr. Dugan outline it as levels of data. And if we think about our organizations and how we've operated and what's been prioritized, whether it's by legislation or different forms of accountability, it's really been at the level 1 satellite data level. And that's focusing on data that has a large grain size. It illuminates patterns of achievement, equity, and teacher quality and retention. So we're looking at things like achievement and opportunity gaps, disproportionality, and it's very high level, where we're trying to make shifts at a site level, at a whole classroom level, at a system level, at a state level. And it points us in a general direction for further investigation. Level 2 data is something that we've seen become even more critical over the course of the past 14 months. These are data that are medium grain size, so it might be things such as interim assessments, local assessments, common assessments, and they help us to identify reading, math, and skills gaps, such as if you think of like a DRA assessment, you think of DIBELS, you think of NWEA MAP, Illuminate, iReady, those type of assessments. They are more map data, level 2, which allow us to look at patterns across classrooms, across grade levels, but in a more interim manner. So they might be pulse administrations once a month, every few weeks. But what we've also seen emerge is this need for what is referred to in the book Street Data as street data. And it's a different concept where we're finding the need to be able to look at fine-grained data that's more individualized at the student level. And it really helps us to understand the student, the staff, and the parent experience. In the role that I've served in over the last 5.5 years with the San Diego County Office of Education, I'll be very transparent. A lot of our work has been at level 1 data and providing support to districts and site leaders around that satellite data, analyzing it, visualizing it, and interpreting it. And what we noticed just about 2 weeks into the shutdown, right at the end of March 2020, is we needed to identify what map data was in place. And then we were able to really understand how we as a county office had gaps in our own expertise around developing systems for monitoring, collecting, and representing street level data. And these are things that might be captured through instructional walkthroughs. It might be captured through empathy interviews, a lot more experiential types of data. And it's something that has not been prioritized as much within the current system of accountability that we're in. And so that has led us to really shift our focus to focusing on building data fluency across the system. And so that's what I'm going to encourage you to think through the lens of today as we engage with this is how might we shift from this focus on satellite data to really building data fluency through all of our services and supports at all levels of the system. I'd like to present to you a wonderful framework that I found from Data Camp that's really supported me over the last year or so in terms of thinking through the levels of developing data fluency within our organization. And so when you think of building the data dream team, it's not just about the people. It's about the entire system and how it's oriented to be able to develop a culture that's focused on a high-performing data using culture. And it includes tools, organization, processes, people, and infrastructure. And we're going to walk through each of those components today to help you think through and self-reflect on potential gaps within your own system as it relates to these different domains. I'd like to offer to you this visual that helps you, it's almost like a rubric if you look at it, helps you to identify where your organization might be at in its development towards data fluency. One of the things that I love about this is that at the top, it outlines the infrastructure, the people, the tools, the organization, the processes, and allows you to reflect on whether your organization is data reactive, data scaling, data progressive, or data fluent. And so as I approached this with our team, I had to reflect on our own services and where we landed in terms of infrastructure, people, tools, organization, and processes. What I identified is that we were all over the map. So in some areas, we were data reactive. In other aspects, we were data scaling, but we weren't quite data fluent in any of our areas. And that was because our world had shifted. The context had shifted. We no longer had the data that we'd relied on for so long. And so it required us to relearn and redevelop our supports and think about how we could move forward differently. And so I'd encourage you to keep this slide and reflect on it and possibly even think for a moment right now in any one of these domains where your system might be. I'm going to give you just a moment to read over it. And I would love it if you could participate in the chat. There's no rank in the room. And so I'd love transparency if you've identified an area where you would like to call out where you're still developing if you could put it in the chat pod for us. And it is a little bit blurry, but I did include the hyperlink at the bottom where you can also find it. So we're going to dig into each of the different domains of this framework and talk about possible ways to build towards data fluency. And we're going to start with infrastructure. So one of my favorite phrases as it relates to data is garbage in, garbage out. Your analysis is as good as your data. When it comes to data infrastructure, it's really important to know that the data that's represented within any one of your systems is only as good as the data that's being added into that system. And so one of the components that we had to evaluate as we were reaching out to support our LEAs is that if there was data coming in, we needed to look at the quality, but what we also identified as it related to infrastructure is that ourselves and many of our districts that we supported hadn't really thought about building out an infrastructure around street level data. The systems were built out to support high level satellite data, and some of the systems were developed to build on the map data, but there was a significant absence of being able to build an infrastructure around quantifying some of those street data points. One of those components could have been through classroom walkthroughs. How do we start to aggregate those? How do we look at them differently to identify the student experience? How do we quantify them and have common conversations around them? And so I'd like to offer these tidbits for you on shifting from data reactivity to data fluency. And the first thing is, if you're thinking about a new data platform or thinking about integrating anything that's going to help move your LEA towards data fluency, develop an implementation timeline for onboarding districts so that you know exactly how to develop out, or onboarding your district to be able to develop capacity in those that you're working with. Pilot a data platform that brings together academic, social, emotional, and e-learning data with customized visualizations. One aspect that I love about the infrastructure component is the idea of democratizing data access. And this is something that it can be a little bit controversial depending on the organization that you serve within, because data access means that lots of people will want to have their voice heard in terms of the direction that they want to steer the organization in towards improvement. But what I've recognized throughout this process and through my years in interacting with data is the broader the representation of the voices, the greater the improvement efforts will be aligned with the overall vision of the district, school site, or organization as a whole. And so it's really important to think about who has access and to what data and to what level, and how their voices are included in conversations around infrastructure and data quality. Establishing a data validity focus group is really important, whether you are bringing in a new interim assessment platform or you're thinking of a new way of capturing some of that street level data. Bringing together individuals that can speak to data quality, challenges within the system. Again, garbage in, garbage out. You want individuals that are going to be critically reflective of whether or not the system is working in the way that it was intended. And then identify any challenges with data entry at the district level or site level that reflect fractured systems that impact the data infrastructure. In a current project that we're working with, we've been really focusing on developing data infrastructure with a specific district. And one of the things that we noticed is we're consistently having errors in the map data that was represented and some of that street level data that was represented within the system. And as we reflected through, we identified that the challenge was with data entry and codes not being used correctly. And so being able to have that infrastructure developed where it's not just we're pulling out the data, but that we have a systemic process for validating the data, determining what to do with the data, and ensuring that there's broad access to the data is critically important in the development of infrastructure. I'm gonna go back one. Sorry about that. And the next dimension is people. So as we think about our infrastructure and have that in place and have moved towards a data fluency as it relates to infrastructure, the next aspect to focus in on is on the building of capacity of the people that are within your organization related to that shift to map or street level data use. We know that the implementation of professional learning is critically important to the development of data fluency. And one of the things that I would encourage you to consider is the development of a service plan. And I've put a model in front of you that shows how we've implemented our data service plan in accordance with several projects that have moved some of our districts towards the high functioning use of map and street level data. And what we did is we incorporated 3 different modules. And within each, there were 2 learning sessions and 2 coaching sessions, and they were anchored into some essential learnings. And so we moved through a progressive experience to develop data fluency that supported our leaders that we were engaging with in understanding not just the data itself, but how to leverage it through tools, processes, and then scale it within their organization. As I've worked with and coached a number of different leaders across our county, one of the things that they've expressed to me is a bit of an anxiety about interacting with data. People feel like they're going to break something if they go into the system, or that they have to be an expert in Excel to be able to interact with data. And that's the wonderful thing about this shift to more map and street level data. The street level data is very granular. And so bringing in smaller samples of empathy interviews or walkthroughs to be able to develop a deeper understanding is something that will build confidence and competence in the leaders and the teachers within your system to be able to be more data savvy. I would like to say something kind of controversial: gone are the days of the big data. I think that the focus is going to be on the more granular and experiential data if we've learned anything from the past 14 months. And so I'd encourage you to think about, if you're rolling out any new data initiatives, or if you're identifying that the people within your system might have some gaps in their own understanding around the high quality use of data, that you consider the development of a data service plan that moves them from just looking at the data to internalizing it and aligning it with the improvement process so that it can actually make change happen within the system. As we move beyond people, we're going to launch into the tools. So as you're building capacity in your people, the question is, how are you building capacity in them? This is where I would encourage you to incorporate a framework into the data culture work to support with data democratization. We are definite users of the culture of data use framework that's adapted from the WestEd framework for data use. This is something that we use across our services and supports now at the county office. And it looks at the dimensions of capacity building, which I think you saw at the heart of our service plan on the prior slide. And so there are 5 building blocks for capacity building that we engage with. The first is ensuring access to data. So who has data, to what level, and who's controlling giving access to data? What does that mean beyond just giving somebody a password? How are we equipping them with the tools? Then how are we supporting the individuals with making meaning from the data, building their knowledge and skills to use the data, clarifying expectations for data use, and leading a culture of data use? And at the county office, we've taken this to heart, and we've started to build out a profile of a data literate leader that we will have in full draft form at the end of June. And our goal is to start building out protocols and processes that would align with each of these domains. But as you think about your own organization and you think about where the gaps are with the leaders that you're engaging with, you might reflect on which one of these elements do you need to further develop supports around that you can integrate into your professional learning sessions or your one-on-one coaching sessions to help launch into the work with them. Another tool that we leverage across all of our data projects is the Ladder of Inference. And so when we engage individuals with data exploration, taking them through a progressive interaction with the data from looking at the available data and selecting the data and going through the decision-making model of paraphrasing, naming, explaining, and then deciding what to do before taking action is a process that is something that will become a schema for leaders that you're engaging with as you progress through the data capacity building work. And so we match this with our culture of data use framework when we're looking at the making meaning from data and leading a culture of data use is helping to build this schema across all of our professional learning sessions. The next aspect of the framework is organization. So I'd like to offer to you another potential book. I know I mentioned Street Data already by Shane Saphir and Dr. Jamila Dugan, but I'd also like to encourage you to consider the Data Coach's Guide to Improving Learning for All Students. And I use the Data Coach's Guide for the development of many of my professional learning and coaching appointments. And what it does is it provides a number of different tools on how to shift the thinking of the system around creating and cultivating a data using culture. Within that guide, there are specific chapters, and I've linked chapters 1 through 3 for you. They are in a PDF version where it really talks through examining your organization through the lens of scaling a data culture, identifying what one of the challenges is, or what the challenges are with the development of that data culture, helping to see what the data gap is. And in terms of organization, what it does is it helps to anchor individuals into looking at their current reality and using a text to rub that up against. And if we think about this in classroom teaching, we do this all the time where we have students annotate texts and reflect on it from their own experience. I do the same thing with the leaders that I engage with is we walk through the chapters one at a time and over several sessions to reflect on the data gap as it relates to the system. And it helps to build that context of the organization, which builds urgency for the work, which then helps them to understand their own individual gaps or areas for growth so that we can help build that progress towards data fluency. And so in the event that you don't want to purchase that book, again, I have linked these first 3 chapters for you that you can review and consider how might this help me as a leader approach the development of a high-performing data team within my organization. Because I saw a great question in the chat pod, and it has the entry point of this work always been around a shared data project? And the answer is no. We engage in one-on-one coaching, and the framework is still used for that. And so if you think about this, whatever your role is, whether you're supervising a group of assistant superintendents, principals, you're working with a group of teachers, you're working one-on-one, this process can be utilized with, it doesn't have to be holistic. You don't have to go through all domains of it, but you could launch in on the people, tools, organization, processes aspect with an individual. But if you're also working with a technical team within your district, not just keeping them in the infrastructure bucket, but also building their capacity. Because what we find within education, within organizations, is sometimes you have the tech team and then you have the data team or the assessment and accountability team that's going out and working on helping to interpret results. What I'm encouraging here is that to develop a high-performing data team is that you figure out how to bring them together, bringing the 2 different sides of the house together to learn each other's lingo and to build coherence across those 2 different or disparate teams will really help to amplify the work of your organization and build coherence in the way that you approach change moving forward as it relates to data work. Within the organizational work, as we do engage with teamwork, we work on norm development. And so what we have found through a lot of the work, what I have found through a lot of the work with our districts is there are norms for meetings and there are professional standards for the profession. But one of the aspects that tends to be missing within different cultures are norms developed around a high-performing data using culture. So I would encourage you to consider using the adapted framework from WestEd's Culture of Data Use project to think through how you might, or how we might, develop norms around the different framework elements. I've engaged with multiple districts around this work, and what they say is having these spelled out in terms of ensuring access to data, making meaning from data, clarifying expectations for data use, and so on, helps them to be cognizant of all aspects of the culture of data use framework, whereas they might have just been previously focused on clarifying expectations for data use and making meaning from data. It helps them to step back and see their role not only as a facilitator of the work and ensuring that the quality of the work, but also the culture aspect of the work and the infrastructure component of the data work. And so as we think about that, building a dream team, and we're building capacity in people, and we're helping them to learn how to interact with the data at a deeper level, establishing these norms for development are critically important, as it keeps the focus on the work and not on the fractures within the system. And our last aspect of this is on processes. And so as we think of this through line of the building of a dream team, and we've talked about infrastructure, people, tools, and organization, I like to land with processes. And the reason for that is processes, when we engage in them, become like little file cabinets within our brain that we can go back to over and over again when we approach a new and different set of data. And so having a core set of processes and protocols that you are able to develop and go back to over and over again with the individuals from within your organization will help build a schema of how we do business when it comes to analyzing and approaching different types of data, whether it's satellite data, map data, or street data. And so there's a couple of simple ones that you can adopt. The easiest one is noticings and wonderings, and it stays really low on that ladder of inference, where it's building that mindset of observing the data and understanding the data and not jumping up to action. And then prioritizing it and looking at what has been confirmed from the data. There are a lot of different processes and protocols that you can engage in, but less is more. What I tend to see when I go out and I'm starting to work with districts is they'll have lots of different approaches to looking at data, and their team doesn't know how to access what. And so aligning your processes and protocols with the culture of data use framework helps to build those little file cabinets that individuals can go into and pull out and apply to a situation, which helps to amplify that data culture within your organization. For example, with noticings and wonderings, I would say that that's making meaning from data. And so I would inform my team that I'm working with that this process and protocol is best used when you're making meaning from data, or building an understanding of the data, so that when they approach a new set of data, they're able to open up that little file cabinet in their brain, pull it out, and apply it to the situation. Because overall, that's really what we're working towards, is when we're looking at the development of a data dream team and moving towards an approach of data fluency across the organization. Part of it's about the system and structure that we're using to organize and represent the data, but a big component of it is helping to develop the schema within the staff that we supervise and interact with, so that they feel comfortable and confident in engaging with data of lots of different levels, so that when they start to encounter data like, I keep going back to it, classroom walkthrough data or empathy interview data or shadowing data, they don't get overwhelmed by it because it's qualitative in nature, but they're able to start to apply different tools and processes to the different forms of data to extract themes and make meaning and not spin out. Because we know in education, we are so saturated with so many different types of data that it would be very simple for an individual to get overwhelmed with it all. But I would encourage you that by using something like the Data Camp framework, that you can evaluate where your system is at and then putting into place the infrastructure, the people, the tools, organization, and processes, that it will help you to move your team from data reactive to data fluent, which will just change the entire culture in which you function. And so with that, that is it. I think I'm right on time for completing my part of the presentation. And I would love to open it up for questions and conversation, feedback. Feel free to unmute yourself.
So Christine, I just saw a couple of questions in the chat. I know that we gave the link to the slideshow, but I did see one. Is that course still available on Data Camp?
Right, so it's not even a course, it's just open access. You can access the information from Data Camp for free. I can find the link for you and upload it to the Sketch, but I believe that it was on there. But I can definitely include it in the notes from this slide deck also. But yeah, it's open access, so anybody can go and find it. It's just a website called datacamp.com, and this is their IPTOP framework is what they call it, IPTOP.
Perfect. And then the second question that came up is, has the entry point for this work always been around a shared data project?
Yeah, and I think, Evan, that I might have answered that question a little bit ago around that we leverage it in individual coaching also, but you can, oh, I see that I answered that already. Are there any other questions? Because I would love to hear from you all, or a unique challenge that you would like some assistance with solving that we can troubleshoot as a group.
Hey, Christine, it's Evan.
Hi, Evan.
How's it going?
Good.
This has been great. I'm just curious, what insights did you have with your own county office in terms of like turning your sites inward for this, the blueprint and the processes, because you're dealing with both your internal stuff, then when you're dealing with the district, it adds a whole new level of complexity.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Evan. I love that so much. And I'll tell you that our big reflection is around the people dimension as it relates to this IPTOP framework, that we had to identify and reflect on the fact that we hadn't yet become super clear on what it was we were trying to develop across all of our different services as it related to our data work. And through our integrated services team, we've spent the last 7 months working through the culture of data use framework from WestEd to develop that profile of a data literate leader. And so we had to really identify what were the skills and dispositions that would need to be cultivated within each of the domain of the culture of data use framework for a leader to emerge as quote unquote data literate. And so we've been doing self-reflection as we've gone through it, kind of rubbing up against that reality of ensuring access to data. If these are the characteristics of a data literate leader for ensuring access to data, do we possess them? Where are the gaps in our own understanding? What would we need to do to remediate that for ourselves so that we can better serve and support externally our districts, and so on and so forth. And so there's been a lot of introspection as we've been developing this profile of the data literate leader, because what needs to happen is we can't do that work if we haven't done it for ourselves. And so it has provided us this opportunity to re-envision how our services and supports will be scaled out as we move beyond this school year and into the next school year.
Thanks. So would you say it's kind of, you've overlaid this over your other work, like system of support work and everything, so everybody's going out armed with this framework for all of the work that's happening, including, are there any like curriculum and instruction specialists who are also taking this level of data understanding out when they do their work?
Right, so our integrated services team internally is cross-divisional. And so we have individuals, or sorry, cross-division. It's everybody from across the different departments within our division. So we have curriculum and instruction specialists, we have individuals from early education, migrant education, and they're all contributing to this work and starting to build out some of their services and supports with the culture of data use framework. It's definitely come to life with our pilot projects using the Core Data Collaborative and Forecast 5, where we've been piloting some work with the Forecast 5 work, and also made its way into some of our differentiated assistance year 1 supports, where we find that we are using a lot is the Ladder of Inference has really permeated a lot of our DA work, and helping to build that progressive schema around the approach to data. And so I would say that we're more in a data scaling phase as it relates to the culture of data use work in relationship to people. We're upskilling right now within our organization. We haven't moved fully to data fluency, but we are kind of between data scaling and data progressive right now.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Just note the ladder of inference is great. I just finished the compassionate systems training, so it's like super relevant. I appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. And when you partner this work with the work that Peter Senge and Meta Bowl are doing with the compassionate systems framework, it definitely brings data to life in a different way. And that's part of why I really love the work of Shane Safir and Dr. Dugan, is because it's really focused on an empathy-based and equity-based approach to leveraging educational data. And I think that it brings those two sides of the house together. And thanks, Joel, for dropping in the chart from Data Camp. I appreciate that. Are there any other questions or reflections? I'd love to hear from anybody else.
Hi, Christy. This is Tacey, and I've heard you present several times in the last year or so, and I'm always thankful to hear your expertise and your resources and hear things that San Diego County is doing and prioritizing. And I'm in a county, a smaller county, where our data and research team is a team of one speaking. And so this has been so helpful, just how you are connecting data literacy to continuous improvement, and really thinking about the resources that we have on the table, and how do we as a county articulate our, and I'm using Evan's language, just how we are just really packaging what we can offer to our LEAs related to data literacy and systematizing our data use. I think I'm wondering, where do you suggest we start, right? My role is fairly new in the county, and thinking about how do I leverage, your team's expertise as you've packaged this presentation, and just the wonderings of where do we start, right? As a smaller county, a smaller team. I pulled up the West Ed document that you referenced several times, and it sounds like perhaps following that framework is a good place to start. What are your thoughts?
Sure, that's a great question, Tacey, because it can seem very overwhelming, especially when we look at all of the different domains, and we wonder, like, how do I get the biggest bang for my buck sometimes? So I would encourage you to think of an internal and an external move. So what could be done internally to shift your internal county office team towards data fluency? And so maybe you focus in on people or infrastructure. And then externally, first of all, looking at your services that you currently provide and what pivots could be made within those, because you can see these as lanes. You can do some of this work in isolation. It's not going to build data fluency across the system, but sometimes we just have to take one small bite. And so it could potentially be tools or processes. How are we building out tools and processes that can be used throughout our professional learnings that create the development of schema around data fluency? And so we start building out one aspect of it. And then that work, once it gets up and going, we step into another lane and we start building it. It's definitely not something that you bite off all at one time. This has been a progressive body of work for us with lots of different individuals. But I think that just thinking of it in that way would be very beneficial. So maybe focus internally on people and then maybe externally on tools or processes, Tacey, and I'd be happy to talk more with you offline about that. Awesome. Any other questions?
All right, well, if there are any other questions, we have a few more minutes. If not, I just want to jump in and thank Christine for a wonderful presentation and also thank all of the attendees for attending this session. And now we encourage you all to join in the speakers panel at 12, where a few of today's speakers will discuss metrics we should focus on as we emerge from the pandemic.
Thank you all. I'll stay on for the next 5 minutes. You're welcome to head out and grab a little bite for yourself before that main session. But again, I will stay on the line for several minutes for anyone that has any other questions that they might have.